A shipwreck can spell disaster for man, and it can even lead to sunken treasure. But for famed photographer David Dubélé, 3 sunken ships promise a different kind of treasure. His assignment for National Geographic magazine is to capture the explosion of life that happens on artificial reefs, including reefs with past lives as ships of war.
It's baroque and beautiful and intriguing.
It's a combination that makes for astounding pictures,
Cowabunga.
but only for photographers who are very patient,
There's not a chance of light.
very talented, and sometimes very lucky.
I think we got the picture.
See if he's got what it takes to get the shot. David Dubélé has been to almost every imaginable place, capturing some of the best underwater photos in the world for National Geographic. And some of those spots are tougher than others. But how did he find himself here? He's in a helicopter, about to watch a World War II warship, the Vandenberg, get sunk on purpose and for a very special reason. Once beneath the waves, the ship will become the world's second largest intentionally sunk artificial reef. And David hopes its sinking will become an amazing photo sequence for National Geographic. On board, 2 of David's cameras will capture the event, if they survive the sinking. But sinking a ship is not always an ending. It can be a beginning, the birth of an artificial reef, a large man-made object that helps build new marine ecosystems. David's National Geographic story is going to include at least 3 ships turned artificial reefs, which means there's a lot on his agenda. But David is one of the few underwater photographers who has what it takes to reveal the complex web of life on an artificial reef.
What we're doing with artificial reefs is to describe what America is underwater, at least the east coast of it. We live, this country, on a continent that has an enormous flat continental shelf. And on this shelf, it's gray, it's flat, it's featureless. Anything you put down there becomes a gathering place for marine life. Anything that recruits life becomes a reef.
David's assignment will take a full year, but a sunken ship takes far longer to develop into a thriving, living reef. In 1936, the U.S. Coast Guard commissioned the USS Duane. It spent World War II in combat against U-boats, but in 1987, its afterlife as an artificial reef began. More than 2 decades later, it's more like a crowded apartment complex for sea creatures of the Atlantic.
And it's an absolutely beautiful place. Overly decorated, except it's overly decorated with biology.
David's mission here is to capture the incredible detail of what was once the floating home for hundreds of American sailors, and which now has a different kind of life passing through it. Sounds easy.
Wreck photography is, in essence, architectural photography, except you're photographing your building, which of course is a ship, at night, in the fog, and in the rain, all the time.
Which makes world-class photography infinitely more challenging.
I tell my colleagues who take pictures on the surface, how would you like it if every day the farthest you could see was to the end of your garage, and you had to make a story?
And that garage is under as much as 30 meters of water.
That too?
Now look, see what happens?
Photographing artificial reefs is a highly technical specialty. David's wife, Jennifer, is his professional partner and an underwater photographer as well. Their combined skill is essential to managing all the equipment needed to accomplish this assignment.
This is an underwater light. that looks a little bit like Medusa. It's so complicated that we have a hand-generated manual on how to charge it.
The most important thing about underwater photography is to be able to see what you're shooting. And that's where a viewfinding system is very important. And the final thing is you put on a giant dome in the front of the housing, which can handle this big lens.
Underwater, objects appear closer than they really are. To correct that, a special dome that covers the lens.
Strobes are on, the housing is on. Pushing the button, everything should fire. Oh please, oh please. Aha! Marvelous!
The shot David wants will not be easy to make.
So what happens with this panorama is I take a shot like this, vertically. Another shot like this, vertically.
It'll
Another
be
shot
a
like this,
panoramic
vertically.
shot made up of a series of photos that are stitched
Okay.
together after the fact.
And the easiest way to do this is not to set up any ropes, it's just basically swim along the deck line.
The dive team knows this shoot will be complicated. And because it requires a lot of time underwater, potentially dangerous, the plan had better be right.
This shot is going to be the hardest shot because it's totally dependent on current. I mean, if I get in here and we can't move and I'm blowing across there, I mean, I've got to be able to swim the entire length of it, hold fairly steady and shoot a picture.
Yeah.
But when the plan hits the water, will it go the way David drew it up?
So we're going to shoot the bow, then the next frame, no divers. The next frame, no divers.
But with all underwater shoots, the weather plays an important role. And today, it's a problem. Specifically the wind, which surprisingly has an effect underwater.
The problem is we have bad visibility coming from inshore wind. And inshore wind is kicking up all sorts of particles, so it's very, very difficult to make that picture that I saw.
After an hour, David surfaces to check his results.
I'm seeing the thing in bits and pieces, and then I get the bridge, and then I'm too tight on the bridge. It's very frustrating and a lot of swimming. All at the same time. Frustrating, swimming.
The shoot doesn't work. David and Jen hope for better weather tomorrow. No such luck. And when the weather changes, so must the plan.
There's not a chance of light. So, what I'm going to do is I will change to the wider angle lens rather than try and do the panoramic outside of the wreck.
David's new plan will take him inside the wreck instead.
I want to work inside the wheelhouse. The entire interior is as if it's plushly carpeted with sponges, ascidians, cup corals, and it's an absolutely beautiful place. But to get the best out of it, we have to have the ability to light everything. We can't depend on any kind of light bouncing across the ceiling and illuminating another area of the bridge because light gets so quickly absorbed underwater. The hard part is getting all of this stuff to the wreck through the currents and having 20 minutes to shoot my architectural picture.
The scuba tanks hold an hour of air, but it takes most of that time to set up the gear underwater.
I'll use strobes that have long cords and are triggered by what they call slave units.
The long cords are needed to reach underwater and inside the wreck.
I'll use the HMI lights pouring through the doors and some of the windows.
The HMI lights are cumbersome, but they mimic daylight and reduce the need for sunshine, which will be in short supply now.
Hey, David, you see that black cloud up in front of us? Oh, yeah. The big one? That's where we're headed.
It's like setting up a photo studio underwater. And David wants a diver in the shot to add perspective.
I'll have a diver who will be coming into the room, so there'll be a little bit of action in it, and possibly divers looking through some of the portholes.
It's a complex setup, 30 meters down, with lights, cables, and divers. And David will take about 300 photos. David and the crew struggle on the wreck. The old warship is fighting back. The light and space are awkward, and David's not getting the picture he had imagined.
As a photographer, you say, well, that's a pretty good picture. And at the same time, there's always this other voice on your other shoulder saying, not good enough, and kicks you in the ear. You could do better, and kicks you in the ear again. Why don't you try to do it better again? So there's always this battle about, you know, the good and evil voices in the photographer's head.
And a review of the snaps with Jen bears out his hunch.
Not so good. It just doesn't work sometimes. It was a bridge too far, where we pushed too much to try and get something done that just didn't gel. It's a tough, tough shoot in a place that requires a lot of technique and a lot of technical support as far as lighting and planning. When we were looking at this,
So the plan will have to change to accommodate the ship's position underwater.
if we have a little bit more light going this way,
David won't force as much artificial light this time. You'll have to rely on some sun.
this
It's
is the
blue.
picture, you
It's
know.
the blue.
That has to be there.
Well, you had to see it in the dark, in a raging current,
Yeah, and a raging current.
To know
you
that.
Nearly die, and
and
that's
that's what
fine. Yeah,
you saw
yeah,
to make
good.
that decision, but it is the blue.
Yeah. Because we're going to take the black light hedge, we can do the wet disconnect.
Okay.
He'll shoot in full
We need to do that
daylight
at
with
another
one
time, but
HMI.
What we have to do now is go back to the wheelhouse during the day with a single HMI light. Taking two was just crazy. Plug around and see if she works.
So down they go again to put the new plan into action.
It took 3 dives to make this dive. Almost like dress rehearsals in a show, and everything went perfectly well. We knew what we were shooting. We knew how we were going to light the thing.
Using natural light from above relieved them of an HMI and added some magic from scuba bubbles.
We knew about the reflection with the top of the wheelhouse of the bubbles, which is like a quicksilver mirror. And we had the portholes with the nice blue daylight.
It's one of those days when everything is going right and you hate to leave. But when they do, they know they've gotten something special.
I think we got the picture.
Right.
Everything looked really great in there.
But boy, that is a lot of work for one picture.
David has shot more than 300 pictures, and now it's time to find that one special frame. They know it's in there somewhere.
You're even getting the fish reflected.
Yeah.
David knows it when he sees it. And this is the one. The photo that pays off.
So you have magic. All the detail is there today. Before, there was just too much shadow.
And now that the shoot has succeeded, David can think about which artificial reef comes next. And a little banjo always helps him think. And when David thinks, he thinks big. This time about a very big fish called the Goliath grouper. And this part of David's assignment will begin with a ship called the Mizpah. Built in 1926, the ship served in World War II as a convoy escort. In 1968, it was sunk off the coast of Florida. Today, the Mizpah is part of a group of wrecks that form a mature artificial reef. David is interested in this spot because it attracts Goliath groupers, a large fish that's returning from the brink of extinction, thanks in part to these man-made reefs.
It's wonderful to watch these fish that have almost disappeared They were saved in 1990 because it's now illegal to catch a Goliath grouper, and they're beginning to come back. And one of the reasons why they're beginning to come back is because these artificial reefs, places where they can spawn, exist on a plane that never existed before.
Which means now there's a lot of them down there, just waiting to be photographed. But like David's previous missions, timing, weather, and lighting have to be just right. David and his team go down to the Mizparek. Their gear is at the ready, and right on cue, several Goliath groupers reveal themselves.
And the Goliaths were lying in the sand like Volkswagens in a parking lot. We went inside the wreck, and they began to come out, or slowly emerging. And you could see this whole reef that never existed before. And because they protected these incredible fish, the population's exploding. But it really is sort of amazing to swim alongside a fish that weighs considerably more than you do, and possibly more than my Uncle Johnny.
The giant fish are also accompanied by many small fish called scad with their silvery shine, which is causing a photographic problem. Check of the day's photos confirms the trouble.
Goodness. All right, let me see what happens when this strobe goes
The
off.
camera down there, and everybody's acclimated, but that's what you get. When the strobe goes off, and at first you have like 6 grouper, and the strobe fires, and then you have that.
God, it looks like the Twinkie aisle in the Walmart.
I know, doesn't, I mean, it just, they
Attack.
explode away.
Yeah.
They're gone, and all you have is the big dust clouds.
The shiny scad act like little mirrors, reflecting David's strobe, making the right exposure
That's
tricky
actually
to
the
achieve.
Strobe fire.
Maybe not that's such a hot idea.
Patience is a virtue if you're a National Geographic photographer. So it's back into the water with David. He suspects that the groupers are about to spawn and that the scad are going to feast on the eggs. David has never photographed the spawning, and he hopes he's picked the right time to dive. As the scad swarm the groupers, David moves in. Even though he doesn't capture the moment of the grouper spawning, the swirling of fish before him creates the visual symphony David was hoping for.
Wow, wow, and wow.
Did we get what we wanted?
We got a lot of what we wanted. Holy moly. That's a lot of animals. That's a lot of happy. What that is, that's a lot of happy.
David checks his camera to confirm what he's gotten. An incredible display of natural interplay on an artificial reef.
It's an extraordinary thing, you know. It's there's towers full of people in the back there, in Florida. And right at their doorstep, this whole other world is taking place with the largest fish on the reefs.
That's really nice.
Which brings us back to where we started, the death of a ship and the birth of an artificial reef. The sinking of the Vandenberg is a priceless opportunity for David. And unlike his other reef shots, he only gets one chance to get this photo right. That means lots of prep. At National Geographic Magazine's photo engineering department, David is working with the team to figure out where on the ship to put the 2 unmanned cameras and how to trigger them to shoot.
We're going to put one there shooting down that way and one right there at the base of there.
It's an engineering challenge almost more daunting than the sinking of the ship itself. But one simple engineering idea seems to hold promise.
So can I try this right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can come up here.
The principle of the toilet ball.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. Water rising. Water.
Just as a ball rising with water level shuts off a running commode, David's shutters will be triggered when these buoyant balls are lifted by the inrush of water as the Vandenberg sinks.
What is genius?
Sounds simple, but will it work? As she goes down, David will shoot manually from a chopper. And Jen will shoot from water level in a nearby boat. David thought the Vandenberg might take 20 minutes to fill and sink. Instead, she hurried to the sea bottom in less than 2 minutes. From Jen's vantage point, it looked iffy for the cameras. The explosion was uncomfortably close to the shutter triggers. If that's the case, there will be no pictures. It's time to go to the wreck and retrieve David's 2 cameras. At first glance, they seem undamaged. But did they get the shot? The bow camera snapped a photo every second from the time the dynamite went off until the ship sank.
So let's see if we got a picture. All right, here we go.
The other camera shot every 2 seconds from the stern.
A couple thousand images, and finally, all of a sudden, scrolling, and then all of a sudden, an image appeared. And then we saw it.
I like that.
Oh!
I'm sinking.
Yeah.
That's a perfect storm.
Okay, go to the next one. And we're afraid, aren't we? Yeah.
Yeah, this.
I mean, it really is this 1 second between
That's
that
a
wave
nice
sweeping
shot.
in with the dishes,
That's a perfect storm moment.
and then the wave, 1 second later, hits the camera. And then we're underwater. And it's really violent. And air is rushing out from all the compartments. And it's like this. Boom. Unbelievable. Normally I like to be behind the camera. In this situation, maybe not.
Wow.
The result? Time-lapse sequences from thousands of photos showing the death of a ship and the birth of a reef.
Cowabunga.
The Vandenberg now lies safely on the ocean floor, and her new mission begins. Aquatic life will come slowly over many years, but in time, this retired Navy warship will become a glorious reef like others before her.
These structures in the ocean catch, categorize, and envelop life as no other structure can. It's funny, the ocean seems to be, at first glimpse, an empty blue world, and yet it is the place where life exists on our planet, more than any other place.